The Knights of the Cross by Henryk Sienkiewicz. If you appreciate my work, leave a trace in the comments. Chapter 47. The prince was the first to take the floor at the consultation and spoke as follows. It is bad that we have no writing nor testimony against the counts. Although our suspicions may be justified, and I myself think that they and nobody else captured Duran's daughter, still what of it? They will deny it. And if the Grand Master asks for proofs, what shall I show him? Bah, even Duran's letter speaks in their favor. Here he turned to Zbyszko. You say that they forced this letter from him with threats. It is possible, and undoubtedly it is so, because if justice were on their side, God would not have helped you against Rotgear. But since they extorted one, then they could extort also two. And perhaps they have evidence from Durand that they are not guilty of the capture of this unfortunate girl. And if so, they will show it to the master, and what will happen then? Why, they admitted themselves, gracious Lord, that they recaptured her from bandits and that she is with them now. I know that, but they say now that they were mistaken, and that this is another girl, and the best proof is that Durand himself disclaimed her. He disclaimed her because they showed him another girl, and that is what exasperated him. Surely it was so, but they can say that these are only our ideas. Their lies, said Mikolai of Dlugolas, are like a pine forest. From the edge a little way is visible, but the deeper one goes, the greater is the density, so that a man goes astray and loses his way entirely. He then repeated his words in German to Delorc, who said, The Grand Master himself is better than they are, also his brother, although he has a daring soul, but it guards knightly honor. Yes, replied Mikolai, the master is humane. He cannot restrain the counts, nor the assembly, and it is not his fault that everything in the order is based upon human wrongs, but he cannot help it. Go, Sir Delorc, and tell him what has happened here. They are more ashamed before strangers than before us, lest they should tell of their outrages and dishonest actions at foreign courts. And should the master ask for proofs, then tell him this. To know the truth is divine, to seek it is human. Therefore, if you wish proofs, Lord, then seek them. Order the castles to be summoned and the people to be questioned. Allow us to search, because it is foolishness and a lie that this orphan was stolen by bandits of the woods. Folly and lies, repeated Delorc, because bandits would not dare to attack the princely court nor Durand's child, and even if they should have captured her, it would be only for ransom, and they alone would inform us that they had her. I shall narrate all that, said the Lotharingian, and also find von Burgau. We are from the same country, and although I don't know him, they say that he is a relative of Duke Geldries. He was at Szczytno and should tell the master what he saw. Zbyszko understood a few of his words, and whatever he did not, Mikolai explained to him. He then embraced Delorcia so tightly that the knight almost groaned. The prince again said to Zbyszko, And are you also absolutely determined to go? Absolutely, gracious lord. What else am I to do? I vowed to seize Szczytno, even if I had to bite the walls with my teeth, but how can I declare war without permission? Whoever began war without permission would rue it under the executioner's sword, said the prince. It is certainly the law of laws, replied Zbyszko. Bah! I wished then to challenge all who were in Szczytno, but people said that Duran slaughtered them like cattle, and I did not know who was alive and who dead. Because, may God and the Holy Cross help me, I will not desert Duran till the last moment. You speak nobly and worthily, said Mikolai of Dlugolas, and it proves that you were sensible not to go alone to Szczytno, because even a fool would have known that they would keep neither Durand nor his daughter there, but undoubtedly would carry them away to some other castle. God rewarded your arrival here with Rotgear. And now, said the prince, as we heard from Rotgear, of those four only old Siegfried is alive, and the others God has punished already either by your hand or Durand's. As for Siegfried, he is less of a rascal than the others, but perhaps the more ruthless tyrant. It is bad that Durand and Danusia are in his power, and they must be saved quickly. In order that no accident may happen to you, I will give you a letter to the Grand Master. Listen and understand me well, that you do not go as a messenger, but as a delegate, and write to the master as follows. Since they had once made an attempt upon our person, in carrying off a descendant of their benefactors, it is most likely now that they have also carried off Durand's daughter, especially having a grudge against Durand. I ask therefore of the master to order a diligent search, and if he is anxious to have my friendship, to restore her instantly to your hands." Zbyszko, hearing this, fell at the prince's feet, and embracing them said, "But Durand, gracious lord, Durand, will you intercede also in his behalf? If he has mortal wounds, let him at least die in his own home and with his children." "There is also mention made of Durand," said the prince kindly. "He is to appoint 2 judges, and I too also to investigate the count's and Durand's actions, according to the rules of knightly honor, and they again will select a 5th to preside over them, and it will be as they decide." With this the council terminated, after which Zbyszko took leave of the prince, because they were soon to start on their journey. But before their departure, Mikołaj of Długolas, who had experience and knew the Teutons well, called Zbyszko aside and inquired, "And will you take that Bohemian fellow along with you to the Germans?" "Surely he will not leave me. But why?" "Because I feel sorry for him. He is a worthy fellow, but mark what I say, you will return from Malborg, safe and sound, unless you meet a better man in combat, but his destruction is sure." "But why?" "Because the dog brothers accused him of having stabbed de Forsey to death. They must have informed the master of his death, and they doubtless said that the Bohemian shed his blood. They will not forgive that in Malborg. A trial and vengeance await him, because how can his innocence be proven to the master? Why, he even crushed Danveld's arm, who is a relative of the Grand Master. I am sorry for him, I repeat. If he goes, it is to his death." "He will not go to his death, because I shall leave him in Spykow." But it happened otherwise, as reasons arose whereby the Bohemian did not remain in Spykow. Zbyszko and Delorch started with their suites the following morning. Delorch, whose marriage to Ulrika von Elner, Father Wiszoniek dissolved, rode away happy and with his mind entirely occupied with the comeliness of Jagienka of Długolas, was silent. Zbyszko, not being able to talk with him about Danusia also, because they could not understand each other very well, conversed with Hlawa, who until now had known nothing about the intended expedition into the Teutonic regions. "I am going to Malborg," he said, "but God knows when I shall return. Perhaps soon, in the spring, in a year, and perhaps not at all. Do you understand?" "I do. Your honor also is surely going to challenge the knights there, and God grant that with every knight there is a shield-bearer." "No," replied Zbyszko. "I am not going for the purpose of challenging them, unless it comes of itself, but you will not go with me at all, but remain at home in Spykow." Hearing this, the Bohemian at first fretted and began to complain sorrowfully, and then he begged his young lord not to leave him behind. "I swore that I would not leave you. I swore upon the cross and my honor, and if your honor should meet with an accident, how could I appear before the lady in Zgorzelets? I swore to her, lord. Therefore have mercy upon me, and not disgrace me before her." "And did you not swear to her to obey me?" asked Zbyszko. "Certainly, in everything, but not that I should leave you. If your honor drives me away, I shall go ahead, so as to be at hand in case of necessity." "I do not, nor will I drive you away," replied Zbyszko. "But it would be a bondage to me if I could not send you anywhere, even the least way, nor separate from you for even one day. You would not stand constantly over me, like a hangman over a good soul. And as to the combat, how will you help me? I do not speak of war, because these people fight in troops, and in a single combat you certainly will not fight for me. If Rotgeir were stronger than I, his armor would not lie on my wagon, but mine on his. And besides, know that I should have greater difficulties there, if with you, and that you might expose me to dangers." "How so, your honor?" Then Zbyszko began to tell him what he had heard from Mikołaj of Długolas, that the counts, not being able to account for de Forsey's murder, would accuse him and prosecute him revengefully. "And if they catch you," he said finally, "then I certainly cannot leave you with them as in dog's jaws, and may lose my head." The Bohemian became gloomy when he heard these words, because he felt the truth in them. He nevertheless endeavored to alter the arrangement according to his desire. "But those who saw me are not alive any more, because some, as they say, were killed by the old lord while you slew Rotgeir." The footmen who followed at a distance saw you, and the old Teuton is alive, and is surely now in Malborg, and if he is not there yet, he will arrive, because the master, with God's permission, will summon him." He could not reply to that. They therefore rode on in silence to Spykow. They found their complete readiness for war, because old Tolima expected that either the Teutons would attack the small castle, or that Zbyszko, on his return, would lead them to the succor of the old lord. Guards were on watch everywhere, on the paths through the marshes and in the castle itself. The peasants were armed, and, as war was nothing new to them, they awaited the Germans with eagerness, promising themselves excellent booty. Father Caleb received Zbyszko and Delorch in the castle, and immediately after supper showed them the parchment with Durand's seal, in which he had written with his own hand the last will of the Knight of Spykow. "He dictated it to me," he said, "the night he went to Szczytno, and he did not expect to return." "But why did you say nothing?" "I said nothing, because he admitted his intentions to me under the seal of confession. May God give him eternal peace, and may the light of glory shine upon him. Do not say prayers for him. He is still alive. I know it from the Teuton Rotgear, with whom I had a combat at the prince's court. There was God's judgment between us, and I killed him. Then Durand will undoubtedly not return, unless with God's help. I go with this knight to tear him from their hands. Then you know not, it seems, Teutonic hands, but I know them, because before Durand took me to Spykow, I was priest for 15 years in their country. God alone can save Durand. And he can help us too. Amen." He then unfolded the document and began to read. Durand bequeathed all his estates and his entire possessions to Danusia and her offspring, but in case of her death without issue, to her husband Zbyszko of Bogdaniec. He finally recommended his will to the prince's care, so that, in case it contained anything unlawful, the prince's grace might make it lawful. This clause was added because Father Caleb knew only the canon law, and Durand himself, engaged exclusively in war, only knew the knightly. After having read the document to Zbyszko, the priest read it to the officers of the Spykow garrison, who at once recognized the young knight as their lord and promised obedience. They also thought that Zbyszko would soon lead them to the assistance of the old lord, and they were glad, because their hearts were fierce and anxious for war, and attached to Durand. They were seized with grief when they heard that they would remain at home, and that the lord with a small following was going to Malborg, not to fight, but to formulate complaints. The Bohemian Gloach shared their grief, although on the other hand, he was glad on account of such a large increase of Zbyszko's wealth. "Hey, who would be delighted," he said, "if not the old lord of Bogdaniec, and he could govern here. What is Bogdaniec in comparison with such a possession?" But Zbyszko was suddenly seized with yearning for his uncle, as it frequently happened to him, especially in hard and difficult questions in life. Therefore, turning to the warrior, he said on the impulse, "Why should you sit here in idleness? Go to Bogdaniec, you shall carry a letter for me." "If I am not to go with your honor, then I would rather go there," replied the delighted squire. "Call Father Caleb to write in a proper manner all that has happened here, and the letter will be read to my uncle by the priest of Kresnia, or the abbot if he is in Zgorzelets." But as he said this, he struck his moustache with his hand and added, as if to himself, "Bah, the abbot!" And instantly Jagiełło arose before his eyes, blue-eyed, dark-haired, tall and beautiful, with tears on her eyelashes. He became embarrassed and rubbed his forehead for a time, but finally he said, "You will feel sad, girl, but not worse than I." Meanwhile, Father Caleb arrived and immediately began to write. Zbyszko dictated to him at length everything that had happened from the moment he had arrived at the forest court. He did not conceal anything, because he knew that old Mako, when he had a clear view of the matter, would be glad in the end. Bogdaniec could not be compared with Spykow, which was a large and rich estate, and Zbyszko knew that Mako cared a great deal for such things. But when the letter, after great toil, was written and sealed, Zbyszko again called his squire and handed him the letter, saying, "You will perhaps return with my uncle, which would delight me very much." But the Bohemian seemed to be embarrassed. He tarried, shifted from one foot to another, and did not depart until the young knight remarked, "Have you anything to say yet? Then do so." "I should like, your honor," replied the Bohemian. "I should like to inquire yet what to tell the people." "Which people?" "Not those in Bogdaniec, but in the neighborhood, because they will surely like to find out." At that Zbyszko, who determined not to conceal anything, looked at him sharply and said, "You do not care for the people, but for Jagiełło of Zgorzelce." And the Bohemian flushed, and then turned somewhat pale and replied, "For her, lord." "And how do you know that she has not got married to Chtan of Rogo or to Wilk of Brzozowa?" "The lady has not got married at all," firmly answered the warrior. "The abbot may have ordered her. The abbot obeys the lady, not she him. What do you wish then? Tell the truth to her as well as to all." The Bohemian bowed and left somewhat angry. "May God grant," he said to himself, thinking of Zbyszko, "that she may forget you. May God give her a better man than you are. But if she has not forgotten you, then I shall tell her that you are married, but without a wife, and that you may become a widower before you have entered the bedchamber." But the warrior was attached to Zbyszko and pitied Danusia, though he loved Jagiełło above all in this world, and from the time before the last battle in Ciechanów, when he had heard of Zbyszko's marriage, he bore pain and bitterness in his heart. "That you may first become a widower," he repeated. But then other, and apparently gentler, thoughts began to enter his head, because, while going down to the horses, he said, "God be blessed that I shall at least embrace her feet." Meanwhile Zbyszko was impatient to start, because feverishness consumed him, and the affairs of necessity that occupied his attention increased his tortures, thinking constantly of Danusia and Jurand. It was necessary, however, to remain in Spykow for one night at least, for the sake of Dolorch and the preparations which such a long journey required. He was finally utterly worn out from the fight, watch, journey, sleeplessness, and worry. Late in the evening, therefore, he threw himself upon Jurand's hard bed, in the hope of falling into a short sleep at least. But before he fell asleep, Sanderus knocked at his door, entered, and bowing, said, "Lord, you saved me from death, and I was well off with you, as scarcely ever before. God has given you now a large estate, so that you are wealthier than before, and moreover the Spykow treasury is not empty. Give me, Lord, some kind of a money bag, and I will go to Prussia, from castle to castle, and although it may not be very safe there, I may possibly do you some service." Zbyszko, who at the first moment had wished to throw him out of the room, reflected upon his words, and after a moment pulled from his traveling bag near his bed a fair-sized bag, threw it to him, and said, "Take it and go. If you are a rogue, you will cheat. If honest, you will serve." "I shall cheat as a rogue, sir," said Sanderus, "but not you, and I will honestly serve you." Siegfried von Löwe was just about to depart for Malborg when the postman unexpectedly brought him a letter from Rotgear with news from the Mazovian court. This news moved the old Knight of the Cross to the quick. First of all, it was obvious from the letter that Rotgear had perfectly conducted and represented the Jurand affair before Prince Janusz. Siegfried smiled on reading that Rotgear had further requested the prince to deliver up Spykow to the order as a recompense for the wrong done. But the other part of the letter contained unexpected and less advantageous tidings. Rotgear further informed him that in order better to demonstrate the guiltlessness of the order in the abduction of the Jurands, the gauntlet was thrown down to the Mazovian Knights, challenging everybody who doubted to God's judgment, i.e., to fight in the presence of the whole court. "None has taken it up," Rotgear continued, "because all saw that in his letter Jurand himself bears testimony for us. Moreover, they feared God's judgment, but a youth, the same we saw in the forest court, came forward and picked up the gauntlet. Do not wonder then, O pious and wise brother, for that is the cause of my delay in returning. Since I have challenged, I am obliged to stand, and since I have done it for the glory of the order, I trust that neither the Grand Master nor you whom I honor and heartily love with filial affection will count it ill. The adversary is quite a child, and as you know, I am not a novice in fighting. It will then be an easy matter for me to shed his blood for the glory of the order, especially with the help of Christ, who cares more for those who bear his cross than for a certain Jurand, or for the wrong done to a Mazovian girl." Siegfried was most surprised at the news that Jurand's daughter was a married woman. The thought that there was a possibility of a fresh menacing and revengeful enemy settling at Spykow inspired even the old count with alarm. "It is clear," he said to himself, "that he will not neglect to avenge himself, and much more so when he shall have received his wife, and she tells him that we carried her off from the forest court. Yes, it would be at once evident that we brought Durand here for the purpose of destroying him, and that nobody ever thought of restoring his daughter to him." At this thought it struck Siegfried that owing to the prince's letters, the Grand Master would most likely institute an investigation in Szczytno, so that he might at least clear himself in the eyes of the prince. Since it was important for the Grand Master and the chapter to have the Mazovian prince on their side in case of war with the powerful King of Poland. To disregard the strength of the prince in face of the multitude of the Mazovian nobility was not to be lightly undertaken. To be at peace with them fully ensured the knights' frontiers and permitted them better to concentrate their strength. They had often spoken about it in the presence of Siegfried at Malborg, and often entertained the hope that after having subdued the king, a pretext would be found later against the Mazovians, and then no power could wrest that land from their hands. That was a great and sure calculation. It was therefore certain that the master would at present do everything to avoid irritating Prince Janusz, because that prince, who was married to Ketstut's daughter, was more difficult to reconcile than Zimowit of Plock, whose wife, for some unknown reason, was entirely devoted to the order. In the face of these thoughts, old Siegfried, who was ready to commit all kinds of crimes, treachery, and cruelty, only for the sake of the order and its fame, began to calculate conscientiously. Would it not be better to let Durand and his daughter go? The crime and infamy weigh heavily on Danveld's name, and he is dead. Even if the master should punish Rotgear and myself severely because we were the accomplices in Danveld's deeds, would it not be better for the order? But here his revengeful and cruel heart began to rebel at the thought of Durand. To let him go, this oppressor and executioner of members of the order, this conqueror in so many encounters, the cause of so many infamies, calamities, and defeats, then the murderer of Danveld, the conqueror of von Burgau, the murderer of Meiniger, Godfried, and Hugh, he who even in Szczytno itself shed more German blood than one good fight in war. No, I cannot. I cannot, Siegfried repeated vehemently, and at this thought his rapacious fingers closed spasmodically, and the old lean breast heaved heavily. Still, if it were for the great benefit and glory of the order? If the punishment should fall in that case upon the still-living perpetrators of the crimes, Prince Janusz ought to be by this time reconciled with the foe and remove the difficulty by an arrangement, or even an alliance. They are furious, further thought the old count, but he ought to show them some kindness. It is easy to forget a grievance. Why, the prince himself in his own country was an abductor. Then there is fear of revenge. Then he began to pace in the hall in mental distraction, and then stopped in front of the crucifix, opposite the entrance, which occupied almost the whole height of wall between the two windows, and kneeling at its feet he said, "Enlighten me, O Lord, teach me, for I know not. If I give up Durand and his daughter, then all our actions will be truly revealed, and the world will not say Danveld or Siegfried have done it, but they will lay the blame upon the Knights of the Cross, and disgrace will fall upon the whole order, and the hatred of that prince will be greater than ever. If I do not give them up but keep them or suppress the matter, then the order will be suspected, and I shall be obliged to pollute my mouth with lying before the Grand Master. Which is better, Lord? Teach and enlighten me. If I must endure vengeance, then ordain it according to thy justice. But teach me now, enlighten me, for thy religion is concerned, and whatever thou commandest I will do, even if it should result in my imprisonment, and even if I were awaiting death and deliverance in fetters." And resting his brow upon the wooden cross, he prayed for a long time. It did not even for a moment cross his mind that it was a crooked and blasphemous prayer. Then he got up, calmed, thinking that the grace of the wooden cross sent him a righteous and enlightened thought, and that a voice from on high said to him, "Arise and wait for the return of Rotgear." So, I must wait. Rotgear will undoubtedly kill the young man. It will then be necessary to hide Durand and his daughter, or give them up. In the first instance, it is true, the prince will not forget them, but not being sure who abducted the girl, he will search for her. He will send letters to the Grand Master, not accusing him, but inquiring, and the affair will be greatly prolonged. In the second instance, the joy at the return of Durand's daughter will be greater than the desire to avenge her abduction. Surely we can always say that we have found her after Durand's outrage. The last thought entirely calmed Siegfried. As to Durand himself, there was no fear, for he and Rotgeir had long before come to an understanding that in case Durand were to be set free, he could neither avenge himself nor harm them. Siegfried was glad in his terrible heart. He rejoiced also at the thought of God's judgment, which was to take place in the castle at Siekanow. And as to the result of the mortal combat, he was not in the least alarmed. He recollected a certain tournament in Königsberg, when Rotgeir overcame two powerful knights, who passed in their Andekev country as unconquerable fighters. He also remembered the combat near Wilno, with a certain Polish knight, the courtier Spitko of Melstin, whom Rotgeir killed. And his face brightened, and his heart exulted, for when Rotgeir to a certain extent was already a celebrated knight, he first had led an expedition to Lithuania, and had taught him the best way to carry on a war with that tribe. For this reason he loved him like a son, with such deep love, that only those who must have strong affections locked up in their hearts are able to do. Now that little son will once more shaded Polish blood, and return covered with glory. Well, it is God's judgment, and the order will at the same time be cleared of suspicion. God's judgment. In the twinkling of an eye, a feeling akin to alarm oppressed his old heart. Behold, Rotgeir must engage in mortal combat in defense of the innocence of the Order of the Knights of the Cross. Yet they are guilty. He will therefore fight for that falsehood. What then if misfortune happen? But in a moment it occurred to him again that this was impossible. Yes, Rotgeir justly writes that by the help of Christ, who cares more for those who bear the cross than for a certain Durand or the wrong done to one Mazovian girl. Yes, Rotgeir will return in 3 days, and return a conqueror. Thus the old Knight of the Cross calmed himself, but at the same time he wondered whether it would not be advisable to send Danusia to some out-of-the-way, distant castle, from which in no possible manner the stratagems of the Mazovians could rescue her. But after hesitating for a moment, he gave up that idea. To take overt action and accuse the order, only Durandauna's husband could do that, but he will perish by Rotgeir's hand. After that, there will only be investigations, inquiries, correspondence, and accusations from the prince. But this very procedure will greatly retard the affair, and it will be confused and obscured, and it goes without saying, it will be infinitely delayed. Before it comes to anything, said Siegfried to himself, I shall die, and it may also be that Durandauna will grow old in the prison of the Knights of the Cross. Nevertheless, I shall order that everything in the castle be prepared for defense, and at the same time to make ready for the road, because I do not exactly know what will be the result of the meeting with Rotgeir. Therefore I shall wait. Meanwhile, 2 of the 3 days in which Rotgeir had promised to return passed by, then 3 and 4, yet no retinue made its appearance at the gates of Szczytno. Only on the 5th day, well nigh toward dark, the blast of the horn resounded in front of the bastion at the gate of the fortress. Siegfried, who was just finishing his vesper prayer, immediately dispatched a page to see who had arrived. After a while the page returned with a troubled face. This Siegfried did not observe on account of the darkness, for the fire in the stove was too far back to illuminate the room sufficiently. "Have they returned?" inquired the old Knight of the Cross. "Yes," replied the page, but there was something in his voice which alarmed the old knight, and he said, "And Brother Rotgeir?" "They have brought Brother Rotgeir."
Remember to subscribe.